The small town of Ravenswood was silent on that cloudy morning. The fog hung over the streets, creating a mysterious scene that perfectly matched the atmosphere of the city. Locals knew there was a place where time seemed to stand still, a place that was steeped in ancient secrets and mystery, Silas's antique shop. Silas was an elderly, reclusive, and mysterious man. His shop, hidden in the darkest corner of the city, was a refuge for those seeking peculiar, strange, and even macabre objects. He had a unique ability to find items that had a dark history, something that attracted eccentric collectors, occult scholars, and the curious alike. But there was one object in his shop that stood out among all the others, something that never stopped haunting visitors. It was an ancient and macabre mask, made of wood blackened by time and adorned with grotesque details. The eye sockets were deep and dark, as if the mask was looking directly into the soul of the beholder. The mask's lips were curved in a sinister smile, as if it knew terrible secrets that it would never reveal. Silas claimed that the mask had a dark past, that it was permeated with evil energy, and that it brought bad luck to whoever possessed it. He insisted that the mask was a unique piece, a relic of an ancient cult, and that it should be kept out of human hands. However, his warning only served to increase the interest of his customers, who saw the mask as a rare and intriguing piece for their collection. One morning, a collector of bizarre objects came into Silas's store. His name was Daniel, and he was known for his obsession with unusual items and a complete lack of superstition. He was a skeptical man who did not believe in horror stories or cursed objects. The mask attracted him immediately. Daniel studied the mask with fascination. He was enchanted by the feeling that there was something inexplicable about that object. Silas told him the story behind the mask, but Daniel dismissed the idea that the object could bring bad luck. He saw the mask as a unique piece of art and decided to take it home, ignoring the old antique dealer's warnings. That night, Daniel hung the mask on the wall of his studio. The macabre piece seemed perfectly at home in its dark setting, filled with unusual objects. He lay down on the bed, satisfied with his new acquisition, and fell asleep. However, his sleep was disturbed by a vivid and terrifying nightmare. He found himself wandering through a dark and foreboding forest, with the mask watching him from a tree. As he approached the mask, a growing sense of panic overcame him, and he woke with a start. Scared and panting, Daniel tried to calm down. He dismissed the nightmare as a mere coincidence and rationalized that the mask, although frightening, could have no influence on his dreams. However, he was far from knowing that that nightmare was just the beginning of a series of disturbing events that would lead him to question his own sanity. The days following acquiring the mask were filled with a sense of restlessness that Daniel couldn't ignore. The mask, hanging on the wall of his studio, seemed to constantly watch him, its empty eye sockets conveying a sense of restlessness. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong with that object. At night, he continued to have disturbing nightmares, all involving the mask. In one of them, the mask followed him around the house, whispering unintelligible and chilling words to him. In another, he saw himself wearing the mask and carrying out terrible acts that left him awake in the middle of the night, in a cold sweat and with a racing heart. His obsession with the mask grew as he researched its origins. He spent hours on the internet, searching for information about similar masks, but nothing compared to the macabre relic that hung on his wall. He also consulted antiquities experts, but no one seemed to have any knowledge about the mask or its past. However, Daniel was not willing to give up. The feeling that there was something significant about the mask drove him to continue investigating. He visited Silas's shop several times, hoping the antique dealer could provide additional information. However, Silas remained adamant in his warning that the mask was a cursed object and should be kept out of human hands. Frustrated, Daniel decided to expand his research and sought information about ritual masks used by ancient tribes. It was then that he made a chilling discovery. He found an article that described similar masks used in obscure rituals by an Indian tribe that inhabited the region where the town of Ravenswood was now located. The rituals involved worship of an evil entity that the tribe believed resided deep in the forest. The mask, according to legend, was a symbol of this entity and was used in secret ceremonies that included human sacrifices and dark invocations. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as he read about the horrors that were associated with the mask. The indigenous tribe, however, eventually recognized the harm the mask had brought into their lives and decided to seal it away forever. They believed that the mask contained the spirit of the entity and that sealing it was the only way to prevent evil from spreading. Daniel was perplexed. He began to wonder if the mask hanging on his wall could be the same one that the natives had tried to seal centuries ago. Daniel's obsession with the mask only grew as he continued to investigate its origins. He began to have the feeling that the mask was becoming a part of his own identity. He spent hours each night staring at the mask, feeling like it was calling to him, as if it was trying to reveal the secrets behind his origin. As his nightmares intensified and his obsessions consumed him, Daniel found himself increasingly isolated. His friends and family began to worry about his mental health, and the city was aware of his mask fixation. However, Daniel was determined to discover the truth behind the mask, even if it meant facing the terrors it could contain. Daniel's obsession with the mask has driven him to ever greater extremes. He spent sleepless nights, obsessively studying the rituals and ceremonies surrounding the mask in an attempt to understand its true nature. Desperation gripped him as he searched every search page and every old file he could find for clues. The mask seemed to have an insidious influence on him, as if it were infiltrating his mind. Daniel began to hear whispers in the darkness, indistinct voices that urged him to continue his dark search. He tried to ignore the voices, but they pursued him relentlessly. The nightmares became more frequent and more disturbing. He saw himself performing terrible, inhumane acts in his dreams, acts that left him awake in the middle of the night, shaking in terror. His sanity began to deteriorate, and he could no longer distinguish between reality and a nightmare. The mask, hanging on the wall, seemed to mock him. Its grotesque features seemed to contort and smile maliciously. The town of Ravenswood was aware of Daniel's obsession. Rumors about the mask and its evil effects spread like wildfire, and people began to shy away from it, fearing that the mask would bring bad luck to anyone who came near it. Longtime friends abandoned him, unable to bear his unhealthy obsession. One night, while Daniel was immersed in his studies, he heard a subtle sound coming from the studio. It was a whisper that seemed to come from the mask itself. He approached the mask with his heart racing, and the feeling that something terrible was about to happen overwhelmed him. The mask seemed to vibrate with evil energy. The empty eye sockets seemed to come to life, and a whispering murmur emanated from it. Daniel reached out to touch the mask, unable to resist the feeling that it was trying to communicate with him. At that moment, the world around him disappeared, and he found himself in a dark and terrifying place. He was in the middle of a dense forest, with gnarled trees that seemed to twist towards the sky. The darkness was suffocating, and Daniel could hear the sounds of distant screams and wails echoing around him. The mask was there, hanging from a tree, looking at him with lifeless eyes. She whispered words in an ancient and unknown language, words that echoed in his mind like a curse. Daniel tried to pull away from the mask, but he was stuck in his place, unable to escape the terrifying sight before his eyes. The scene unfolded, and he found himself wearing the mask, performing terrible acts that left him terrified. He was involved in dark rituals, sacrificing defenseless creatures and summoning dark entities. He screamed in despair, struggling to break the mask's hold on him. Finally, he woke up, back to reality, panting and covered in sweat. The mask was still hanging on the wall, looking harmless and motionless. Daniel knew he could no longer ignore the mask's evil influence. He needed to find a way to get rid of her and stop the darkness that surrounded her from consuming him completely. Daniel was determined to free himself from the mask and the evil influence it had on him. He knew he couldn't do it alone, so he sought help from experts in antiquities and the occult. However, the mask's reputation had spread quickly, and few were willing to help him. The mask had become a macabre legend in Ravenswood, and the town was convinced that any attempt to deal with it would only bring more horror. Desperate, Daniel finally found someone willing to help him. It was an occultist named Dr. Viktor D'Angelo, who had experience dealing with cursed objects and evil entities. The doctor agreed to meet Daniel at his home, where the mask was hanging, to assess the situation. When Dr. D'Angelo entered Daniel's studio, the atmosphere was charged with tension. The mask seemed to watch him with a blank stare, as if it was aware of the threat he posed. The doctor examined the mask carefully, muttering words in Latin and pouring holy water over it. The mask remained motionless. The doctor explained to Daniel that the mask was permeated with an evil entity that fed on its wearer's fear and obsession. He believed that to get rid of the mask, they would have to perform a complex exorcism to free the entity. The exorcism was a terrifying process. The doctor recited words of exorcism while Daniel held the mask, which seemed to writhe and twist in agony. The atmosphere was charged with electricity, and the studio was plunged into suffocating darkness. Daniel felt the presence of the entity moving around him, trying to stop them. The exorcism continued for hours, and the doctor and Daniel fought the evil entity with relentless determination. The room was filled with whispering voices and inhuman screams. Finally, with an anguished scream, the entity was ripped from the mask and disappeared into the darkness. When the mask finally calmed down, Daniel knew he was free from the evil that had tormented him. He thanked Dr. D'Angelo for his help and promised never to give in to his obsession again. The mask now lay inert, like an ordinary object, its grotesque features appearing empty and harmless. The city of Ravenswood could finally breathe a sigh of relief, and the legend of the macabre mask seemed to have lost its strength. However, Daniel knew that the mask could never be worn or displayed again. He took her away from the city and buried her in a remote location in the forest, where he hoped she would never give anyone nightmares again. The story of the haunted mask has become a local creepypasta, a dark warning about obsession and the dangers of dabbling in the occult. Daniel, scarred by the terror he had faced, became a keeper of the mask's dark secret, determined to ensure that no one else fell under its evil spell. Ravenswood returned to its tranquility, but the legend of the haunted mask remained alive, a constant reminder that horror stories often come at a terrible price. The city would never forget the mask and the obsession that almost destroyed it, and Daniel would continue to carry the weight of the terrifying experience that changed him forever.